Alatreon Mechanics and Behavior Guide. This video will attempt to explain most of Alatreon's mechanics and behavior to give players a better understanding of its inner workings, which ideally will serve to help players fight it easier. In this video, we will discuss Alatreon's elemental topple and eschaton mechanics, its stats, its general behavior, and how it advances towards certain points of its fight. This video, however, will not cover all the combos it can perform, and neither will we discuss weapon-specific punishes. This video will use information from MechE's Monster Data Database, the Kiranico page for Alatreon, the Monster Hunter World Iceborne general data, weapon attack tables, and damage formula sheets, in-game observations with the help of Hunterpie Overlay and certain mods, information from Juzzi's video on Impossible Alatreon AI, and information gathered by Discord user noderoo on Alatreon's AI and behavior through game files compiled in a post. All of these will be linked in the description. Alatreon has 4 states: Fire Active, Ice Active, Dragon Active, and Elementless. Alatreon will start the quest in either Fire Active or Ice Active, with the event quest Dawn of the Death Star being the only one where Alatreon starts in Ice Active. Every other quest, that being the special assignments Blazing Black Twilight and Dawn's Triumph, as well as the event quest The Evening Star, start in Fire Active. For simplicity, we will refer to the Fire and Ice Active states as the Elemental states. These states can be told apart by visual cues of both Alatreon and the surrounding environment. Alatreon will rotate between its states as the fight progresses. Starting with its beginning elemental state, at a certain point in the fight, Alatreon will switch over to Dragon Active in an uninterruptible animation. After the fight progresses some more, Alatreon will perform Eschaton Judgment, an arena-wide nuke that cannot be avoided. After performing this, it will switch over to the elemental state opposite of the one it was previously. This means that if it was in Fire Active in the previous rotation, it will switch over to Ice Active. To prevent Alatreon from switching to the opposite element, the horns must be broken. The part health of the horns is locked until Dragon Phase, meaning that you will not be able to deal part damage to the horns during the elemental phases, or during the elementless phase. Once one horn is broken, the part health will lock again, preventing you from breaking the other horn until the next rotation. As mentioned earlier, Eschaton Judgment is an unavoidable arena-wide nuke. In order to survive this, players must deal elemental damage to hit a threshold, causing Alatreon to topple. This is a unique topple in that it plays a special animation and lasts longer than a regular knockdown, with the handler commenting about you shutting down Alatreon's power. During this topple, Alatreon enters the elementless state. While unavoidable, the damage dealt by Eschaton Judgment is reduced for every topple that is achieved, reaching a maximum reduction after the 3rd topple. If no topples are achieved, then Eschaton Judgment will rapidly drain your health before you can heal through it. If at least a single topple is achieved, however, then it will be survivable. Eschaton Judgment does not deal direct damage as an attack regularly would, but rather is HP removal, which means regardless of your defense stat, it will do the same amount of damage. However, this means that each tick will not reduce the red part of your health bar, allowing you to fully recover lost health with an Astera Jerky. Now I will show you Alatreon's hitzone table courtesy of MechE's database, once again linked in the description. While Alatreon's raw hit zones stay the same over the course of the fight, its elemental hit zones change as its states change. As seen here, the arms have the highest elemental hit zone values, followed by the wings and legs, and then the head and neck, with the body being an extremely poor elemental hit zone. The hit zone values aren't particularly high either, which means that although elemental damage is instrumental to the fight in combating Alatreon's main gimmick, it is not a particularly strong source of damage. Additionally, if you bring a weapon for a particular state, your elemental damage output will be severely hampered in the other states. For example, if you brought an ice weapon to fire Alatreon, once it switches over to Dragon active, your elemental damage will see a significant decrease in damage. If you fail to break the horns and it switches to ice active after Eschaton Judgment, then you will deal no elemental damage at all. On the other hand, however, Alatreon's raw hit zones are extremely good, with the head being a whopping 85 for both types of melee weapons, which is a higher hit zone value than that of Mollified Clove Taroth. The arms follow at a very high 60 hit zone as well. Range weapons, however, will experience some awkwardness when it comes to its hit zones, as the chest is its highest hit zone value at 45, but this conflicts with its elemental hit zones, which are extremely poor. This is not so much a problem for bowguns, as the elemental ammo of bowguns have very little raw component, so it can go ahead and comfortably hit the better elemental hit zones, and if it chooses the raw ammo types of normal, spread, or pierce, it can go ahead and hit the body for maximum damage. Bow, however, being a primarily elemental weapon, will likely want to aim at the head to rack up elemental damage without losing too much of its raw component. In summary, while bringing element is good for purposes of dealing with the element check, it should not be relied upon as the major source of damage, as the raw component will go further in terms of dealing damage and thus clearing the fight. In this section, I will discuss the general stats of Alatreon once again using MechE's database. In the site, you can adjust for player scaling to see how single player, duos, and multiplayer scaling changes thresholds. Remember to change the scaling and not to use the base amount. In the flinch column, you will see the health for each part, indicating how much part damage would be needed to flinch the monster. Some of these values may be off by 1 due to rounding issues, however it shouldn't be that important. Wound shows how much part damage is needed to break the part. Sever would indicate how much damage is needed to sever the tail. In the sever column, you may also see a value on the row with the head part. This is the elemental topple. You can see here that once an elemental topple is achieved, a long trip of about 12 seconds will occur. Scrolling down, we see the specifics of the element topple threshold stat having the following formula. This would give us the following values. Here we are shown that Alatreon has 52,500 HP. We also see information on status, stun, and mount thresholds here. Initial tolerance is how much the initial status threshold is, with the tolerance increase being the amount of threshold added after each status proc. Max tolerance is the threshold limit. In the column to the left, we see RWT, which refers to roar, wind, and tremor respectively, indicating that Alatreon's roar requires level 5 earplugs and does not cause wind pressure or tremor. Cap shows that it cannot be captured. Alatreon limps at 20%, but since it's in an arena, we don't get to see it limp, and it requires 7,875 damage to fill its clagger threshold, after which any flinch from part damage will cause a clagger. We also see that it has an enrage threshold of 500. However, this does not necessarily mean 500 damage, as this threshold fills up slower when Alatreon's HP is high. Alatreon stays enraged for 150 seconds, and while enraged, it moves 5% faster, as well as deals and receives 20% more damage. You can also see the tenderize formula here, however you can simply tick the tenderize box on top to see the tenderize values. Not shown on the site is information on Dawn's Triumph, which features a vastly weaker Alatreon. Instead, information on it can be seen on Kiranico. This Alatreon has massively reduced HP, and instead of the usual 8.5 part multiplier applied to its base stats in solo, it has a 6.8 part multiplier instead, which means that while its HP is about a fifth of what it originally is, the part health is only slightly reduced. To get the part HP, you will have to multiply this multiplier to the base part stats. This multiplier is also applied to the element topple formula, which means that in solo, Dawn's Triumph Alatreon will have an initial topple threshold of 510 instead of the usual 638. Unique to Dawn's Triumph Alatreon is an HP lock that triggers at around 20% HP. This HP lock will remain until Alatreon has performed Eschaton Judgment and advanced into its second rotation. It is possible to overshoot the 20% mark, going from over 20% to a value lower than 20%. However, its HP will lock after that. It is also not possible to use one big hit greater than 20% of its HP to kill it, as its HP cannot be brought under 1 until it reaches its second cycle. As shown in the previous section, the element Topple threshold follows the following formula. This gives us the following values. As mentioned earlier, this threshold is met by dealing elemental damage. However, each weapon has an additional modifier which determines how much elemental damage dealt actually contributes to the threshold as seen here. This would mean that while weapons like dual blades are naturally known to be premier elemental weapons, it contributes only 0.6 per point of element damage to the element Topple threshold. Meanwhile, weapons like Greatsword, which are known to struggle with element, get a multiplier of 1.1, so it contributes more towards the element Topple threshold than the element damage it actually deals. Furthermore, moves can have additional modifiers on elemental output. The elemental damage done is also influenced by a move's part modifier. Do note that Part Breaker does not affect this. It seems that the formula for the elemental check contribution is calculated by the final elemental damage dealt multiplied by the weapon-specific multiplier, then multiplied by the move part damage modifier. To keep things simple, in this next example we will use two moves that have a move part damage modifier of 1. Using information from the Monster Hunter World Iceborne general data, weapon attack tables, and damage formula sheets, we can calculate the following using Ice Dual Blades and an Ice Greatsword with an element value of 150 and white sharpness on both weapons. With a 22 element hit zone of Fire Alatreon's arms, we see that the Greatsword's basic draw attack does 4 element damage, 5 on an enraged Alatreon. Meanwhile, Dual Blade's basic double slash does 2 element damage per hit, 3 on an enraged Alatreon. Multiplying these values by their respective multipliers and rounding to the nearest whole number for purposes of the element check, we can see that Greatsword would contribute 4 points towards the element check per draw attack, 6 if Alatreon is enraged. Meanwhile, Dual Blades would only contribute 1 point per hit of the double slash, 2 if Alatreon is enraged. These multipliers are likely here to make slower hitting weapons or weapons that aren't particularly element focused like Greatsword and Gunlance a better time reaching the threshold, while balancing more element focused weapons and playstyles such as Dual Blades, Elemental SAED Charge Blade, and Elemental Bowgun so that they don't completely decimate the element check. The elemental check is also relatively easy to achieve. For reference, an unaugmented Frostfang Barioth Greatsword with 630 base element with only Ice Attack 6, using a level 3 jumping wide slash on an enraged Fire Alatreon's arms will already do 109 points towards the elemental check. Meaning throughout the course of the elemental phase, you only need to land level 3 jumping wide slash on the arm 6 times to be safe from Eschaton Judgment. Once again, this is just considering the equipment at base and does not even include additional ways to increase element damage, which should be accessible at this point, such as using the Safi armor set, proccing Coalescence, or augmenting your weapon. As I have also demonstrated in my 8 Topple Alatreon video, using Charge Blade it is also possible to do so much elemental damage to Alatreon in a short period of time that he topples before finishing the Enrage Roar after a wallbang. Each element topple will be accompanied by the handler commenting about how you're shutting down Alatreon's power. The first topple in a rotation will have the handler say, "You're doing a good job containing Alatreon's power." The second will have the handler say, "A lot of Alatreon's power is shut down." The third will have the handler say, "You've shut down enough of Alatreon's power." Subsequent topples will reuse the last text box, however this time the handler will say, "Well done, Pard." As mentioned earlier, each topple will weaken Eschaton Judgment, making it tick slower over the same duration up to the third topple, resulting in less damage, and any additional topples after that will not reduce the damage of Eschaton Judgment. An additional thing to note is that there are certain animations where you can reduce the element topple threshold, but it will lock at 1 until the animation is over, such as when Alatreon is CC'd or during the shift to Dragon Mode. In this section, I will mainly be using Juzzi's video and information from noderoo, as well as my own experiences and understanding of the monster as reference. Alatreon's general attack pattern follows a combo of 0-2 regular moves, followed by a combo finisher, meaning that each of Alatreon's combo strings is composed of 1-3 moves during which Alatreon picks a target to perform the full combo on. If Alatreon is interrupted in the middle of a combo through disables such as flinches, topples, KOs, etc., it'll move on to another combo. Knowing that Alatreon performs actions as combo strings is important due to the fight progression centering around this. Alatreon's fight does not have any time-based mechanics, which is why he can decide to fly, decide to change elements, or decide to perform Eschaton Judgment at varied points in time during the fight. Rather, they are based on the number of combos Alatreon has performed. Before Alatreon performs a combo, the AI performs a check to see if Alatreon should change to Dragon Mode or perform Eschaton Judgment, after which it checks to see if Alatreon should land or fly. If the check does not pass, it adds a counter that tracks how many times that check has been performed. Once this counter reaches a certain threshold, the check will have Alatreon perform its action. These counters reset after an elemental change, either from the elemental mode to Dragon Mode, or from Dragon Mode back to the element mode via Eschaton Judgment. Ignoring health-based triggers which influence the number of checks required to reach the threshold, Alatreon will change elements after 14 element change checks during the first Eschaton Judgment cycle, 12 checks on the second, and 10 on the third and subsequent cycles. Alatreon's flying phase will start after 11 ground combos in the elemental mode and after 3 combos in Dragon Mode. This also means that Alatreon will not fly during the element mode of the third and subsequent cycles due to them only having 10 combos before switching to Dragon. As described earlier, the check for Dragon Mode or Eschaton Judgment comes before the flying check, so the takeoff move will add towards the Eschaton counter. However, the element change check is skipped when Alatreon is flying, so actions spent flying do not contribute towards advancing to Eschaton. Just like with its ground logic, Alatreon has a check counter for its aerial combos. Usually, Alatreon will stay in the air for 5 aerial combos. However, for only the second Eschaton Judgment cycle, it will stay in the air for only 3. As such, ignoring health-based triggers, the structure of an Alatreon fight would look like this. Interesting to note is that if Alatreon loses sight of the target while performing its takeoff move and is made to land before it begins the first aerial combo, upon re-engaging in combat it will take off again. This is due to it reaching the check for the flying phase, but not having any increment in its aerial combo counter requiring it to fly again. Based on logic discussed earlier, performing another takeoff move will still increment the ground combo counter. Discussing health-based triggers, these only apply to the first Eschaton Judgment cycle. While in the elemental phase, if Alatreon reaches 55% HP, the number of checks required to switch to Dragon is reduced to 3. Meanwhile, in Dragon phase, if Alatreon reaches 20% HP, the number of checks required to perform Eschaton Judgment is reduced to 8. This would also explain why it is possible to skip flying during the elemental phase, as the check requirement for the elemental switch can take precedence over the flying check. However, in the dragon phase, Alatreon has to fly before performing Eschaton Judgment even if the 20% HP threshold is met, as the 3 checks for flying phase always take precedence over the Eschaton Judgment check, whether it be at 8 or 14. Similarly, if Alatreon is flying when these thresholds are met, the check requirement for landing is reduced to 1 and therefore will land immediately. Once again, these HP thresholds only come into play in the first cycle and do not affect subsequent cycles. It is also due to these HP thresholds why Dawn's Triumph Alatreon can rapidly switch to Dragon mode after only 3 combos due to its health being so small, but will perform at least 7 ground combos, its takeoff move, and Eschaton Judgment due to its HP locking at 20%. Next, I will be discussing interactions with Clutch Claw, as clutching onto Alatreon will have interactions with its AI. If Alatreon is mid-combo, it will generally ignore Hunter's clutch onto it unless it picks a dragon finisher, in which case, if the Hunter is on the head or arms, it will always pick the dragon punch that pins you, both aerial and flying. If the Hunter is clutched onto Alatreon as Alatreon begins its combo, it will first execute the elemental check, increasing the counter, then move onto its clutch AI track, after which it will resume regular combo logic with the fly check and standard combo AI. As discussed before, if Alatreon is flying, the elemental check counter is skipped. During the Clutch Claw reaction, several things can happen. If the Hunter is not clutched on the head, it has a 50% chance to skip the claw reaction and continue with its combo logic. If it doesn't skip, it will perform its rush attack, and should you be on the head or arms, it will follow up with a pin. This applies for both grounded and flying states. If the Hunter is clutched onto the head, it has a 35% chance of performing the inward or outward lightning rain attack instead of the rush, and a 35% chance of performing the lightning stripes instead of the pin. Afterwards, it will resume regular combat logic. Lastly, I will be discussing interactions with flinching Alatreon in the air. If Alatreon is flinched in the air prior to reaching its flying phase counter and starts flying, you'll simply get an earlier flying phase. It will perform its aerial combos as normal until it lands, and it will not fly again even if it is made to land early. If Alatreon is flinched in the air while having already completed all of its aerial combos for the phase, it will immediately land due to the counter already being at the threshold. However, if Alatreon was made to land early and was flinched mid-air, it will continue its flying phase where it left off. There is a rare interaction where if Alatreon is flying, if it is toppled in a way that prevents it from performing its topple animation, it does a 12-second topple while not entering the elementless state, meaning that in this instance you can already start working towards the next threshold. And that concludes the Alatreon mechanics and behavior guide. I hope that this information will be useful in your hunts, and I'd like to thank my sources for compiling all of this information. There may be some information I might have missed, or some parts that have corrections, so please do check the description and pinned comment to see any potential additions or corrections. With that said, thank you for watching, and happy hunting!